So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our online event for the Digital and Advanced Manufacturing Special Interest Group for the Service and Technology Cluster. My name is Pim van Baarsen and I'm the CEO for the Service and Technology Cluster. We're bringing you this event in conjunction with our friends at Medilink East Midlands, and we've got Teresa joining us, who will be speaking a little bit later on. And also with our friends and colleagues from the Midlands Aerospace Alliance, and we have Andrew Mayer joining us, who again will also be speaking. So really pleased that we could team up with them and make that work. So welcome to all the members of both Medilink and the MAA as well, and of course the STC members, all really good stuff. So we have rather a large number of you today, which is obviously fantastic, but it does mean that we run it slightly differently to how we normally do our webinars. And so rather than people having the ability to ask their questions in person, I would ask that you use the chat functionality to ask any questions that you might have, and then I'll do my best to relay those questions to the speaker afterwards. So every presentation will have a Q&A session afterwards. So by all means ask questions, but please use the chat functionality so we can try to make that happen. We will be sharing the, so we'll be recording this webinar and we will share the recording with you afterwards. We also should be sharing the presentation slides with you all afterwards as well, so you should be able to get that. So we'll be emailing you these afterwards. Just in case you're wondering, that's normally what we do. We have quite a large program today, and obviously we'll try to run it within the time limits. And depending how we go, I might well instigate a small break halfway through proceedings, so we can all sort of stretch our legs or have a coffee break or anything like that. But we'll see how we get on. So with kind of all the housekeeping out of the way, I think we can now sort of start with the first presentations. And so I'd like to hand over to Andrew Mayer from the MAA, who's going to give us a quick introduction to the Midlands Aerospace Alliance.
Thank you very much, Pim.
Pleasure.
So I'm just checking you can see that okay?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Let's try again.
Yeah, there's something there now. That's it.
Fantastic. So thanks very much for inviting us, Pim and Teresa. Looking forward to a good event this morning, and it's in the same time slot that we often use for our event. So we cancelled our event this morning to hope that we would bring more people from our normal event into this one. So really looking forward to hearing from everybody. So just a little bit of background about the aerospace cluster and our organisation before we go to Steve Boyd, who's one of our special guest speakers this morning from our aerospace cluster. So this is a slide we normally use externally, but we might as well use it internally as well. This is how we normally present our cluster. We explain to people where our region is. We're using the old East and West Midlands map. And we note that often people think of the Midlands as a region associated with the automotive industry, less so with aerospace, but that we have a very big aerospace cluster in our region, in fact. And if we include the RAF stations in Lincolnshire and the airports and so on, it's about 70,000 jobs in aerospace. One of the reasons that we don't think of this really as an aerospace cluster very often is that we don't make aircraft, or at least we haven't since the 1960s. But we do make a lot of aircraft systems, best known Rolls-Royce with its aero engine division centred in Derby and at a number of other places in the Midlands, East and West, where they have component factories. We'll be coming back to Rolls-Royce later, of course, to talk about the impact of the crisis. But we also have in the West Midlands companies like Meggitt and Collins and Moog, which make sophisticated systems for aircraft controls, electronics, hydraulics, mechanical, for example, and we've illustrated some of those here. We look at the shape of our cluster. On the right-hand side, we have Rolls-Royce and other aero engine manufacturers like Safran in France or Pratt & Whitney in the US that our companies supply. And we have a deep supply chain here in the Midlands, going all the way through to the material suppliers. The nickel alloys, the titanium and the aluminium for the UK aerospace industry are all made here in our region. Many of our members are metal processing companies or make particular components that go into aircraft systems, such as Steve, that you'll hear from in a minute. But I thought this slide was also important to show today because it illustrates how our companies are linked to other sectors. So this is our perspective of the world. And I'm sure that from other industry viewpoints, you have a perception of the world where aerospace is one of the green boxes along the top. But certainly we've got connections already to other sectors, and many of our smaller suppliers are only partly dependent on aerospace. Geographically, here we are in the Midlands, but to let you know, and particularly if you're not located in this region, then there are sister organisations in other parts of the country. The Northwest Aerospace Alliance, where BAE Systems is located, Aerospace Wales, where Airbus has its wing factory, the West of England, where there are a number of the very large companies. The West of England is kind of the equivalent to the Midlands in terms of the Midlands being a motor industry location. Well, the equivalent in the UK is the Southwest. We're also a member of the EACP, the European Association of Aerospace Clusters, and that organisation has 45 members. So we're one of 45 aerospace cluster bodies like ours on the continent. And of course, we have equivalents in North America, particularly in Canada. So who we are as an organisation, 300 member companies, most of them make flying parts, and most of the flying parts makers are members of our organisation. Flying parts are what Airbus calls the companies that literally make components of aircraft that fly. But of course, we've got a big cluster, as the cluster diagram showed previously, of all sorts of support organisations as well. Most of our work, and I'll discuss this again later a little bit, is about business development and innovation and technology. And that work has had to change to some degree as a result of the current situation. And I thought I'd talk more about this when I come back to you later on. So that's me done, Pim. Just a brief introduction, and happy to hand back to you and over to Steve.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andrew. That was really good. I'm sure that all your members obviously are already well aware, but it's always good for the people from Medilink and from the STC to learn about that sort of thing. But we'll now move on to Steve Boyd, who is going to give us our first presentation on a company case study of today. So Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Pim. I'm Steve, Managing Director of G&O Springs. I've been there 25 years now. I'm a self-certified spring geek. Just want to talk to you today. Let me get the slide to move. There we go. Bit of background, how we see the different sectors' quality requirements, because we work in a few sectors, although we are 86% aerospace. What our thoughts are on the challenges we face. Bear in mind our order book is now less than half of what it was at the beginning of March. And then what opportunities we see for us going forward. Got hopefully a bit of a feel-good story later about the work we did on Ventilator Challenge, which I'm sure a lot of people have been involved with. So a bit of background about the company, family-run company, very technically focused. You can see if you're not in the aerospace industry, these names won't mean anything to you. But if you are, you can see that we've got quite a spread of blue chip customers. We've got all the relevant accreditations and approvals. I won't bore you with the company spiel. I sort of stepped back and we've looked at our customer quality requirements. Now, so I'm not sure whether the audience are in aerospace or not, but every customer we've got has their own supplier quality manual. And these go from 5 pages to 30 pages, but every customer wants something slightly different. A few years ago, AS9100 was introduced, which was supposed to standardise the quality systems for all aerospace. Some people want blue ribbons, some people want it licked by kittens, whatever they want, you've got to hard code it into your quality system, which is actually very, very tricky. When you look at sort of mining or marine or medical customers, or certainly our customers, none of these customers have got specific quality requirements. So all you tend to get is some terms and conditions, and as long as you've got ISO 9001, you're ready to go. So it's interesting to see why they buy from us. So I looked a bit more in detail about the quality tools we use and what makes us aerospace, if you like. Now, if you've been in automotive, you're going to look at these tools and you've been using them for 30 years. But in aerospace, these are really very, very new the last couple of years. So we've always had first article inspection reports, and we've done 8D problem solving for some time. The last few years has seen a bit of a shift. So now we're looking at control plans, PFMEAs, measurement system analysis, production part approval process, statistical process control, and APQP. We'll talk about a couple of these in a bit more detail later on. But as you can see, they're sort of prerequisite. Everybody in aerospace is now demanding them, but the other sectors just aren't interested. You know, we've got a mining customer that grew up out of the Doughty group of companies, and they still use FAIRs, first articles, and they still use 8D problem solving. But the marine and medical customers we've got would probably look at you blank if you suggested using one of those. What we do find, though, is that all of our customers want full traceability, they want 100% quality, and they want excellent delivery. Now, I put 95%, everybody wants 100% delivery, but it's very rare you see it. Now, I'm not sure whether you can see the zero defects logo, but in aerospace, zero defects has been banded around a lot. Nearly every big customer we've got demands zero defects. Join the movement. It's all about making everything absolutely perfect and driving out costs. Now, this I think is a great slide, because my take on aerospace is that we're backward, we're not forward, we're not in front of the game, and we're just trying to catch up with the automotive supply chain. So if you look at sort of levels one, we've got 100% inspection in aerospace. In order to transfer from 100% inspection, we've got to prove that we've got a CPK of better than 1.33 for our process. So anybody telling me that they're at built-in quality level 5, I'd love to see it. We're certainly not, but it's something we're working towards. Now to support this sort of journey to built-in quality, AS 13000 series standards were created. And if I look at some of the tools that we think are going to be key to us going forward, it's process PFMEAs. So process failure mode effects analysis. Apologies if I'm teaching you to suck eggs here, but for us personally at G&O, these have been life-changing tools. You know, it's about you look at your process, look at how it could fail, what controls you've got to detect that failure, what would be the severity, what would be the occurrence. And it's essentially a risk assessment of your process, which is fantastic. We also do a lot of measurement system analysis studies now, so you don't use a tape measure to measure a machine component. You've got to make sure whatever you're using is capable, and it sounds really straightforward. It's only when you go through and use these tools that you find some real shockers, things that you thought were acceptable that clearly aren't. You know, there's the 1 in 10 rule. If you've got to measure into 1,000, your measurement kit has got to be accurate to 1/10 of 1,000, basically. Now we're being asked in aerospace to use control plans, so that's putting together the risks of failure, looking at the features on the component, deciding what could fail, deciding what you're going to control, how you're going to control it, and how often you're going to measure it. And all this sort of feeds into APQP, so Advanced Production Quality Planning. Again, this is all very new to us, but we've seen a step change as a result. So traditionally in aerospace, you use a first article inspection report at the end of the process, or you'd look at what went wrong in the process and you'd then do a Pareto of it. Since you look at what had already gone wrong and put it right for next time. Now we've got a shift where we're looking at what could go wrong and putting controls in place so that it can't go wrong. And this is huge, really, for us. There are lots of AS 13000 series standards. I don't know them all in detail. They're very, very detailed, but they're very good. You know, automotive have used these tools for years, but aerospace are doing it with bells and whistles, and I think that could be really powerful in the future. So in terms of the challenges we've got as a business, you know, we've got all these quality tools. We've got a team of however many people doing PFMEAs, MSAs all day long. Well, there's a lot of expense to that, and it's a lot of bureaucracy. It doesn't help us at all in the current climate. We've also got a very highly skilled and highly paid workforce, which I think is not only a challenge, but, well, it's a challenge at the moment, retaining as many as we can, ready for when we grow in the future. And aerospace traditionally is not at all agile. And all this really adds up to the fact that when we're competing against a non-aerospace manufacturer, we tend to be a lot more expensive. We'll talk more about that later as well, which is hopefully a bit more interesting. So in terms of opportunities, now I see us, as I said, very system heavy, but I see that actually the advanced use of quality tools is going to help us in the future. And so although it's a burden at the moment, we are changing all the time, improving the way we plan production, which is making us much more efficient, which is obviously saving us a lot of cost. We've got a highly skilled workforce that are capable of change, and we are now actually very agile. So over the last sort of 12 weeks, our lead times have dropped from 14 weeks to 6 weeks. Our new product introduction times have gone from 6 days to less than 24 hours. We've done a lot of work recently to make us fit for the future market, whatever that might be. So what our strategy is going forward, really, in a nutshell, is we're looking at embracing all these quality tools that have been imposed on us by the tier ones and the primes, because we think that if we do it properly and we embrace the spirit, then we'll have superior processes, we'll have superior process control. So not only would we be best in class for aerospace, but best in class for any market we choose to serve. You know, it's certainly clear to me now that we can't be just exclusively aerospace. There's just not going to be the business for us going forward, or it's certainly not going to allow us to grow back to where we were fast enough. You know, what I am keen is that we've worked, a lot of us in aerospace have worked very hard over the last 20 odd years or whatever it might be to develop these capabilities and these controls. We can't just throw it away. We've got to create APQP light, or you know, what zero defects light, and apply it to whatever market that we choose to serve. That's my take on the quality scenario at the moment. I want to talk to you about the work we did on Ventilator Challenge UK. If you're not aware, obviously it was a consortium put together of all of the big players, which is all we tend to hear about. Hopefully I'll give you a story about the little people that helped make it happen. All the F1 teams, hopefully you can see the logos there. I won't go through them in detail. So I just want to set the scene really. So the UK went into lockdown from the 23rd of March. It was all a bit of a shock to us all, it certainly was to us. And then on the 25th of March, I get a call from Rolls-Royce, one of our biggest customers, to say they were involved with Ventilator Challenge UK, and that our name was on the Smiths Medical bill of materials. Now, Smiths Medical have been one of our customers for a long, long time. We don't do all their business because we're too expensive. Interestingly, they approached us late last year to say, you know, we've got issues with our current source. Would you like to quote? We went through the process of analysing all their parts. They were over the moon. We've got single piece flow lines with 100% inspection of all features, and they loved it until they saw our price, which was quite an eye opener for all of us really, because we thought that these new flow lines were very cost effective. When you compare them to, you know, a traditional general manufacturer, we were nowhere near, but we've got so much more control than our nearest general competitor, if you like. So then on Thursday, the 26th of March, we split into 2 shifts. So there's 46 of us. We split 23 and 23. So we've got a skeleton crew on both shifts. It was our way of mitigating the risk of one of the teams getting it. We could still operate with the other team. And then on Thursday, again, about 12:12, Rolls sent through some spring design data for one part. So myself and the technical manager sort of had this discussion looking at this part. And so the technical manager says, this looks remarkably like ours, you know. So what do you mean? We'll have a look. So we went back through our records and we designed the part in 2011. So the technical data they'd sent was actually ours originally. So the sort of lights switched on. So the same day we changed the design to tweak what they wanted. Started production three and a half hours or so later. And then on the Friday, we delivered the 6 parts to Rolls at 6:30 in the morning. Now, we didn't know at this time, this was just a sort of sideshow to the main event, essentially. So at just before 12:10, I get 10 drawings from Rolls with a request to produce 8,000 of each part. So they wanted 80,000 springs because they needed to build 8,000 ventilators by the 8th of April. And bear in mind our weekly output was around 4,000 parts. 80,000 in a week was going to be a struggle, but we said yes. Now, the reason we said yes, again, goes back to agility. If there's anybody from Rolls-Royce here, I'm going to apologise now, but hopefully you can relate to what I'm going to say. You know, we felt that we were best placed to supply all these parts, not us producing them, but we understood the customer quality requirements, and we also understood that Rolls-Royce would probably still be sat there now trying to source some of those parts because they hadn't got supply chain knowledge to be able to do it, or the knowledge of the quality requirements. Again, apologies to anybody for Rolls-Royce. So by that afternoon, we'd evaluated all the parts, we'd looked at all the materials, we'd looked at the complexity, the process routes, because thankfully we'd done this work late last year when we were looking to supply them. 4:50, I spoke with Rolls and said, look, yeah, we can do this. And bear in mind, there's no quotes been supplied, there's no commercials in place. And they went, yeah, let's do it. You know, and that was it. That was the extent of the conversation. Let's get on with it. So we did. So by 6:12 the same day, our first part starts on the machine. We've got one part out of the 10 that we can't produce. We've not got the equipment to produce it or the capability. So this was a bit of an issue. So 8:15 or 8:14 on the Friday night, we sent out an email to all UK spring makers requesting help and materials. The same night, 9:35, which was a bit of a big moment for me. Now we've got a competitor, Microspring and Presswork, and to say we're not very friendly is a bit of an understatement. If I was on fire, they wouldn't be on me, to be fair. So for me to go cap in hand was a really big deal, but we did. We knew they'd got the kit to produce this part. By now, my mobile is ringing. We received the inquiry at 12:10 on the Friday. It's late Friday night. My phone is ringing. The emails are binging. People saying, "What can we do? What can we do?" You know, some of the stories I could tell you are unbelievable. The way people went above and beyond to support us. So I get up in the morning. Bear in mind, I'd sent an email out late the previous night to our competitor. 9:37, they contact me to say, "We've set the machine. We've got a secondary op. We know we can do it. You know, we'll get started." We also have a discussion around spreading the load amongst other suppliers. So they take on another 2 parts out of the package. And all of our differences were gone within seconds. So by now, the next morning, 7 out of the 10 parts are already in production. On the Saturday afternoon, a company in London approached me to say, "We've got the material." And I said, "Well, can we collect it today?" I said, "Well, to be honest, we could make you the parts on Monday." Great. So they produced the parts. So we've got all the parts are now got homes. We've just got 2 materials we've got to find. So now it's the Sunday. Now, bear in mind, the country's on lockdown. So we've been sent letters from Rolls-Royce to say that we're allowed to leave the house. So there's myself and my wife jump in her car. There's me with my laptop on my lap, tethered to my phone. The phone's ringing, the emails are binging. We drive from Droitwich to Sheffield, which at that time was quite a scary event, to be quite honest. We got a material supplier that opened his factory on a Sunday to allow us to collect the material. We got another spring company in North Yorkshire that got another material who met us at their facility to let us collect the material. And we drive back from North Yorkshire to Redditch, deliver material to what you'd consider my arch enemy's house, you know, do the social shuffle, which was quite nice. And really, you know, you see in the press about GKN and Rolls-Royce. There are a hell of a lot of people below that tier that made this happen. These are just some of the people in the spring supply chain for the Smiths medical ventilators that went above and beyond, you know, and I mean above and beyond, you know, opening their businesses over the weekend. I'm sort of, I could talk for hours on the challenges and the positives that came out of this. You know, one issue is we knew that it wasn't on the drawings, but because we knew Smiths, we knew they wanted each spring to be packed in a tray. The springs are tiny, you know, they were talking very, very small springs, very easy to lose or drop or tread on. Trying to, and at that time they were planning to build 40 ventilators per shift, 13 facilities, 3 shifts per day. Every shift needed a set of 40 springs, so they wanted them in parts trays. Trying to source 2,000 parts trays in a matter of days is a real challenge. It really is a challenge. We'd exhausted the RS boxes. Thankfully, Corvair, they'd got their own vacuum former, and they just stepped up to the plate and ran that vacuum former 24/7. They didn't charge us; they just did it. You know, some really, really good stories. You know, we got processors. So the platers had their line on standby to plate one of the parts. We did 4 trips up to Sheffield to have parts shop cleaned. The first batches weren't right. We had to scrap them, adjust it, go back and do it all again. Now this was a really hectic few days. I'll give you an example. You know, those trays on that desk, if you see the image, that's one part number. You know, that's a lot of trays. Bit of a feel-good photo there. That was me with the late shift, I think, on the Sunday night, when we'd started to get things a bit better under control. But a great experience. You know, 6 days from inquiry. On Sunday the 5th of April, bear in mind we didn't get the order till the Tuesday. We'd made most of the parts by those at risk. You know, on Sunday, nearly all of the parts are packed, waiting collection. So yeah, great. You know, thanks for your time. Obviously, this is our advertisement on the left. This will be our advertisement going forwards. We'll just take out the aerospace and defence. We're going to keep doing what we're doing because we think it's the right thing to do. So, thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Steve. That was great. Just to reiterate, if anybody has any questions, if you could please use the chat functionality to ask them. There's simply too many of you to kind of like do them in real life, but you'll find the chat functionality at the bottom of your screen to ask a question. I'll ask a question first, if I may, Steve. So you talked about, I mean, fantastic response on the ventilator challenge. You know, and well done. That's really great, and it's fantastic to see companies really coming together to work together and meet this, which is amazing, obviously. But before that, you were talking about you know, sort of quite a big cultural shift within your business. How did that work from a sort of a personnel point of view? Because on the whole, you know, human beings are resistant to change on the whole. How did you manage to implement that shift within your personnel and within the whole business? Because that must have been quite a challenge in itself as well.
It's still quite a challenge. What's been amazing, COVID's actually helped us. So we've been trying to change the culture of the business for a number of years. When we split to shifts, all of a sudden all of the gaps that we had as a business just came to the surface. So we had to close those quickly, and people's attitudes quickly became apparent as well. You know, it certainly sorted the wheat from the chaff. We've now got, we haven't got defined sections anymore. We've got a migratable workforce. So to give you an example, at the moment, there's a team of about 10 people working in a section that normally would have 2, because it's, you know, we just flood the area with labour, complete the job, flood the area. So COVID's actually helped us because people are a lot more compliant, shall I say. That sounds an awful thing to say, but they are. You know, people get complacent, and when something like this happens, they either want to support you and help the business move forward, or they don't. And the majority want to support and will do anything to make sure that we survive and thrive. But you know, talk about the change. This change has been coming over the last few years. When AS 13000 series came out, and we actually moved from, you know, we actually started to plan, do APQP. That triggered a massive investment in our processes and procedures, which has been great. We were about to build an extension to the factory this year. Thankfully, we hadn't started that, and certainly we won't entertain that in the future. We will just work differently. We've learned a lot over the last few months.
And are there maybe sort of one or two takeaways that you could share with the audience here in terms of, you know, we tried this, but that definitely didn't work, or, you know, we tried this and that worked beautifully? Maybe one or two sort of snippets to share. Sorry to put you on the spot, but
now I'm just trying to think what's failed. Touch wood. I think the biggest mistake I've made is not furloughing everybody. So, you know, you needed to be furloughed for 3 weeks by the end of June to be eligible. So I'd cut the business down to where I thought was a sustainable level, only to realise it's not. So unfortunately, I've now got 20 odd people on furlough on 80%, and 20 odd people at work doing 4 days on 83%. And I think we've been cut adrift by the government, but that's probably not the question you're asking. So what would I do? I don't know. I think we've done a lot that's right, and I've been amazed by how people are prepared to change when it gets tough.
it's probably the extremeness of the circumstances that probably helps mold people's position. Because I should imagine that if you try to do this in like a normal environment or a normal situation, there might be a lot more resistance, and presumably because everybody appreciates the situation that they're in, and it's a pretty scary story out there, that they might be more inclined to go with it, I guess.
Yeah, we moved to shifts in a day. You know, we made the decision in the morning, we advised them in the afternoon, and the next day our shift started. You know, so we've had to think on our feet a lot, you know, and be extremely responsive to issues.
Excellent, very good. Does anybody else have any queries? I'm not sort of seeing anything come in on the chat. So now we'll.
Yeah, it was just a shameless pitch for business. We actually packaged so many springs in thermoformings that I've even got a spring tray on my desk at home. Steve and I didn't know each other at the time you were doing it. We could have got something like that to you within hours, Steve. Fantastic.
You know, we would. It's not something we would normally use, so we were doing internet searches, phoning around companies, which is why if you look at the photo, we've got all this mismatch of boxes because we just couldn't source any. Yeah, but yeah, typical. I'll take your details now. Thank you.
I was also thinking when you mentioned the shot peening that you went up north for, because one of our members based in Toaster is a shot peening business as well, and they could potentially assist it. And I think it's one of the things where, and that's something that we're working on with both the MIA and as well as Medilink, where, you know, if organizations like ours can work closely together to help with that and help bring companies together. Because we did our own little effort with PPE production for the Northampton NHS Trust. And again, there were so many people standing forward, and it's so good to bring people together and try to get people to help. So, you know, I think it would be really good if organizations like the STC, like Medilink, like the MAA could play a role in bringing people together. Because if there's a need out there for, hey guys, you know, we're looking for a shop cleaner, do you know anybody? Well, you know, let's try it, because we may well do. And hopefully one of the positives that could come out of this rather horrific situation is that we can see that sort of collaboration a little bit more going forward. So hopefully we can make that happen. You know, and I think that would be great. So yeah, that's excellent. There's one question coming in from, oh wow, of course it's going to be a difficult name. Mark Freiberger-Possel, I probably butchered that, I'm sorry. But his question is, do you find the use of the quality tools helped or hindered the ventilator challenge?
Oh, this is a really good question, because at the time, you know, with all the parts we supply to Rolls-Royce, it's 100% inspection, or you've got to demonstrate a CPK of better than 1.33 to reduce that 100% inspection. There was no way this would have been achievable if we'd have followed the Rolls-Royce quality requirements, and Rolls-Royce knew this. So when we received the quality requirements, I think late on the Sunday or the Monday, parts were already in production. And basically, the quality requirements were you know, give us a fare and get on with it. We did use control plans, but we did it all in a light version, if you know what I mean. So we didn't follow all the bureaucracy, which is where we're going. We're keeping with the spirit and the ethos. We're just not having all of that paper trail behind it. Thankfully, we had no issues with any of the parts. So I'd like to think we got it right. We've since been sent Ventilator Challenge UK quality requirements after the fact, which was interesting.
But has that sort of shown you kind of like different methodology to adapt going forward as well? Because it almost sounds like it wasn't necessarily necessary to go through all those red tape procedures, steps.
Well, I think those steps are best practice, but they're also very time consuming. We need to keep the spirit and we know what we're trying to achieve, and we need to do that in a light, faster version going forward, which is what we're trying to achieve now, when it's not an aerospace part.
Excellent. Right, we just got one more question coming in from Sam Hudson, actually a name I can pronounce, which is great. Steve, which one of the many accreditations or quality requirements your company holds had the biggest impact in how you operated or grew as a business?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt, NADCAP. AS9100 is a little badge to say I do aerospace. You move to NADCAP, you've got a Medal of Honor. It really changes your mindset. Anybody can do AS9100. I could probably, you know, switch an AS9000, an ISO 9000 quality system to AS9100. I could probably do that in an afternoon. We've just got NADCAP we've got NADCAP for heat treatment, for chemical processing, and non-destructive testing. If you're not familiar with NADCAP, it used to stand for North American Defense Contractors Accreditation Program. And it came about because people were having special processes like plating or shot peening or heat treatment done in different countries around the world and getting wildly different quality standards. So, you know, if the specification says, you know, if you say you're going to wipe your bottom with 2 pieces of toilet roll, you use 2 pieces of toilet roll. You don't use 3, you don't use 1, because that's a non-conformance. And if the specs tells you to look at another spec, which tells you to look at another spec, which tells you to look at another spec, you've got to comply with every single one of those specifications in its entirety. So NADCAP by far has increased our cost base. It's also increased our maturity and our control, but it's also opened up the market to everybody for us. Sorry for the long answer.
No, excellent. That was great. I'm sort of conscious on time, but Steve, thank you very much for that. That was very insightful, I felt, and thank you all for the questions as well. That was great. We'll now move on to Teresa, who's going to do a brief introduction to Medilink before we then hear from Neil Campbell. So,
yes,
Teresa, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Pim. Bear with me as I do the share screen bit. I was having fun with this earlier on.
Yes, we did test this earlier and then it worked. So, in theory, this might work.
Right. Can you see this?
Yeah, we can see the PowerPoint interface.
Wonderful. Let's go for it. Was that successful? Can you still see it?
Yes, there's the slides. Beautiful.
Wonderful. Right, sorry about that. All these different interfaces and everyone is different on the share screen. Morning. Thank you very much, Pim. And I'm hoping that we get lots and lots of interest across the board for Medilink and for both MAA and Silverstone from this, because I think the most important thing coming out of COVID and the pandemic is there is capacity for a lot of cross-disciplinary activity across these 3 areas, because the National Health Service needs equipment, it needs expertise in a wide variety of areas, and up to now I think we've all been a little bit in our silos with our expertise, and it is actually possible to transfer that. So thank you for the opportunity to sit here and explain to you at least a little bit of what Medilink can do. Medilink, similar to the MAA, is a group of companies that actually sits across England and Wales in very similar regions to the MAA, so I'm not going to put a map up, there's no need to do that. So we run Medilink East Midlands, covers an area from Lincolnshire right the way down to Oxford City, north of it, and right the way across to Luton. So we do cover a huge area with the activity that we do. And our main activity is to support companies. And so my advisor colleagues and myself, we support businesses in the life science and healthcare sectors to grow and succeed. We also support companies supplying into the medical train who are innovating, and at the moment very, very interested in all the ones who are thinking about transitioning, going across boundaries. So there is a lot of opportunities there. We're also able to support incredibly small companies, you know, the startups who literally have got an innovation idea, not quite sure where to take it at that point. And some of our membership also includes in incredibly large companies, some of our major pharma companies and suppliers as well. So there is huge opportunity to collaborate with various different people. We also have lots of links in with universities, and of course, being the company that we are, we're also very involved with the National Health Service and the National Health Trusts and a lot of the research areas. So there's a huge opportunity there for that innovation. So we provide access, as it says here, signposting to grants and opportunities, lots of tailored business supports, and delivering events, some training courses and networking. Along with everyone else, that side of it, the events and the training, we've had to move across to the webinars, so we're getting incredibly good at that. And we're trying a number of different platforms, hence trying to find out where all the different share screen options are, and all the other different ways of making the IT work as hard as the events did. I don't know about all of you, but I think we're getting to the point where, certainly myself, getting very webinared out, as all the meetings, obviously, are by webinar as well. One of the main things we do, apart from being a networking organisation, is helping people to collaborate, helping them to find that network they need to develop a new idea, is we also provide innovation support grants for small and medium companies that sit in the East Midlands region. As bigger entities, often they're working with smaller entities, there's a supply chain going on here. So it's always possible with innovation in the medical, healthcare, support of those areas, that one of the supply chain may be in the region and may be able to apply for some funding from us. Anything you want to know about that, please do contact me directly or contact Medilink directly, and we can help you with that. We've got quite a few advisors that sit across the region. Nice view of us all. Here's all the mugshots and all the different areas that we specifically cover, although obviously any one of us would deal with any query from any company going forwards. That funding is available for the startups as well as the bigger entities, which is quite important, because we're very aware of the lot of funding out there at the moment is very much targeted at either entities that are already there, are bigger, have accounts for 3 years and so on. So in terms of transitioning from MAA activity and also from the Silverstone type activity, they're looking at innovation, they're looking at perhaps the medical area is the place to go. It's certainly worth coming and talking to us about what you're thinking about, who you might need to meet, who you might want to talk to, who you might want to discuss about what sort of activities the medical side might be interested in looking at going forwards. So here's my contact and also the general one for Medilink. And I know later on during this event, you're going to have a very, very good presentation by Nick Brown, who will explain all the wonders of the NHS and how you can, and in some cases can't, work with that entity going forwards. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Teresa. Let me stop the sharing. Right, that's fantastic.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
I would encourage anybody that, you know, if you do have an interest in the medical sector and you're not already on there, then obviously Teresa is a fantastic resource to get hold of. Likewise, I'm sure Andrew with the MAA, if you're interested or want to look into the aerospace industry, Andrew and his team will be a fantastic resource as well. Almost seemed unfair, Teresa, that I saw that each region has 2 or 3 people and you're doing it all on your own. But presumably that's just so because you're so much better than they are. So that's
it's a very big region.
So what we'll do now is we'll hand over to Neil Campbell from Inspiration Healthcare to talk us through sort of his experiences during the pandemic and things. So Neil, over to you. I'll try and unmute you. Hope that's happened.
Hi, Pim. Can you hear me?
Yes, lovely.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, thanks very much for inviting me along here today. I'm going to give a presentation about the pandemic from an SME in the medical technology sector. And some of the things you'll hear may be not dissimilar to the experience from Steve that you've already heard. And I didn't know Steve had actually been one of the contributors to the VC UK consortium. So fair play to Steve and all of his colleagues and competitors to step up. And I'll explain some of our involvement of that as well. But just to say that Inspiration Healthcare, we're a critical care supplier. We supply ventilators, life support equipment, predominantly for premature babies, but also into adult intensive care. Our big operating centre is in Earl Shilton, so just near Leicester. We're an SME, but we've also recently made an acquisition and we've acquired a British ventilator manufacturer called SLE, and that acquisition closed earlier this week. So we've just doubled in size to about 200 employees. So moving through the pandemic, what was required and how did medical technology companies step up? There were big calls from the NHS for ventilators. So there was NHS supply chain came on to anyone who was on the framework agreements, and to supply ventilators to the NHS, you have to be on a framework agreement to ask what ventilators could we supply, how many, and there were some quite interesting conversations, and I explained some of the issues around that. We also had the calls for the Prime Minister for big industry to help. You know, Boris Johnson was phoning up companies like Meggitt you've heard about, and Rolls-Royce and Dyson, etc., to see who could make a ventilator. And I'll explain a little bit about some of the issues around that partly from a regulatory point of view, and as well as a quality point of view and a logistics point of view. Ideas about support. Ventilators are complex beasts and shouldn't be seen as something that was quite simple. They're not just a bag in a bottle that gets squeezed to provide gas to a patient. Ventilators are life support equipment, and the people who run ventilators, nurses and doctors, biomedical engineers, work 24/7 under some exceptionally stressful conditions, putting large numbers of unknown ventilators into unknown hospitals like the Nightingale hospitals. And how do we support that as an industry? And I'll come on to that as well. So what can an SME do? There's this huge demand profile, and can an SME actually step up and help? And I'll just talk through our journey. So the NHS wanted ventilators. They wanted accessories, all the breathing tubes, all the monitoring stuff that goes with a ventilator. A ventilator will keep you alive, but if you don't have everything else that go with it, it will kill you. And I often say there's only one thing worse than waking up on a ventilator, and that's not waking up at all. But they are very, very complex machines. The accessories needed to go with it, and monitoring equipment, as I've mentioned, but also all the PPE, and this put a huge pressure on NHS supply chain to try and find all of the things that the doctors, the nurses would need to keep patients alive. What can be delivered? How quickly can be delivered? How do we support it? What support can we get? How do we get paid? The pressure in the supply chain for medical technology, and Steve's mentioned it in his talk earlier, but the pressure in the supply chain was quite huge. Chinese companies wanting 100% in advance, for example, companies you've never dealt with wanting 100% in advance. And if we paid the 100% out, would we get paid? And that puts a lot of pressure on SMEs, cash and working capital, as you can imagine. So the first challenge was, can we get the ventilators? And we went out and we leveraged our contacts around the country, around the world. What could we get? The next problem, we found that we could get quite a lot. We were offered lots of ventilators from big companies in China. Some we knew, some we didn't. We did a lot of the things that you would expect a medical technology company to do. We work under the medical devices quality management system called ISO 13485. And so we did a lot of the provenance to try and make sure that we sifted the wheat from the chaff. We weren't going to put our name to ventilators that weren't going to actually work. And actually, unfortunately, some ventilators did get shipped to the NHS hospitals in the Midlands that weren't actually suitable for purpose, but they were bought directly by the Department of Health. So as well as we were finding these ventilators, next question was, can NHS supply chain make a decision quickly enough? Very strange. Usually buying decisions for ventilators takes somewhere in the region of up to about 18 months for a hospital to make a decision for a ventilator. We were asking NHS supply chain to make decisions within hours. We found a very reputable supplier from China who we knew. They're listed jointly on NASDAQ as well as in China. They offered us 1,500 very high-end ventilators, the sort that would be not out of place in any intensive care unit anywhere in the world. Retail around about £20,000 a ventilator. Doing the math, that was £30 million. We could secure them, but they were told that there were other countries interested in these ventilators. We talked to supply chain. They went away. They had to go to the paymasters in Department of Health. About an hour later, we were chasing this up. The ventilators were then sold to France and Italy. So we had to stand down that decision-making process. And very strange to think that we were almost given spot prices and spot delivery for something like ventilators. It's not the commodity exchanges that you would normally expect to do that. And so there was some very, very big pressure on supply chain. What was the commitment we needed to give to the supplier? We couldn't underwrite that order for 30 million without it back to back from the NHS. And suppliers have been really pushing customers like us to actually have letters of credit, have payment in advance, to take delivery almost no matter what. And so there's been some very big pressures on the supplier, from the supplier to the importers. But what we offer is that 13485 approved accreditation. That means that the NHS supply chain have confidence that what we will supply will actually work. There were lots of companies supplying, and we heard lots of stories in the papers, I'm sure, of companies saying that they couldn't supply NHS supply chain when NHS supply chain needed ventilators, but they weren't replying. We were offered technology that was 20, 25 years old, that would have probably retailed for about 10 to 12,000 pounds 25 years ago. We were being offered that net to us for over $50,000 from companies that we've never heard of. So there was an awful lot of rubbish being pushed onto the NHS, and trying to help sort the wheat from the chaff was one of our jobs working with supply chain. Other difficulties in the supply chain, export bans. Governments were stopping exporting ventilators, and that was from the US, from Israel, from other countries who put maybe not official bans on them, but certainly pressures on local manufacturers not to actually export. Brings into a whole context about the European Union, when some countries in Europe were actively, and governments were actively discouraging their manufacturers to supply overseas within the EU. And we've still got export bans for ventilators. Again, they're going on now. Component shortages, as Steve's mentioned, the huge demand on components. Ventilators tend to be sold in, probably the world market for ventilators is probably under 30 to 50,000 a year, something in that sort of ballpark, maybe slightly more depending on whether you count some of the ventilators that we wouldn't normally associate in the UK. But we were scaling up, as Steve's mentioned, we were scaling up to huge numbers quickly, and all suppliers were trying to get from the same component manufacturers, and that puts extreme demand on all component suppliers, and you can understand that caused problems with freight rates. Freight was now becoming a problem. We were quoted for 3 pallets from Hong Kong, £24,000 to bring 3 pallets from Hong Kong in. Customs clearance problems, how are we going to clear it through customs at both ends? And we were given priority rates for priority numbers for customs clearance. So lots of work to try and bring in ventilators into the UK, and lots of complications for an SME like us to actually overcome. But we had some great collaboration from large companies, helping us give us freight contacts to allow us to use their freight forwarders and use their rates rather than the rates that we were being quoted. Companies offering us logistics, to bring in. We had orders for several hundred ventilators. We've got 5,500 square feet of office and warehousing space in Leicestershire. We didn't have the space to bring them all in. So large companies offering us their warehouses to help with the logistics. Training, we normally spend quite a lot of time doing one-to-one or small group training in hospitals, but here we had to find a new way of doing online tools, and some large companies very kindly, not from our sector, these were from the defence and aerospace sector, actually offered to help create online training tools so that the doctors and the nurses would be able to understand the ventilators at their pace rather than relying on us. Our staff didn't want to go into hospital. These hospitals were red zones. COVID-19 hospitals were classified as red zones, and the hospitals didn't want our staff in there. So that put a huge pressure on for us to create new online training tools. We were very pleased with the offers of help from large companies who we'd never spoken to before to help do that. But also NHS supply chain stepped up, with a much maligned NHS supply chain, but they helped with flexible payment terms, with flexible delivery. They even helped fund prepayment in some instances for some companies that I know of to help bring things around for the working capital needs. So there was an awful lot of collaboration with companies that we would not normally associate as collaborators. And even NHS supply chain, we would not normally see them as a collaborator, but more of a purchasing group. But it was fantastic to see that they became very flexible to help the whole sector deliver what was needed to the NHS. Then we come to the Prime Minister's call to industry. Can we get a clean sheet design? Well, and these brought things up as regulatory compliance, usability, training and support, and can an SME help? And we were approached by Thales to join a group of companies that included Megit and GKN, and to name a couple, to see whether we could actually help bring some of our expertise, our sector expertise, into trying to create a clean sheet design. That was on about the 17th of March, and that group actually became VC UK. So I was one of the founding members of that group, and I was privileged to stay on the steering committee from inception through to the wind up last week. So how can we collaborate as an SME? Well, medical device companies have quality management systems, say 13485, heavily regulated. And to put things in context, if you're a ventilator manufacturer, you probably would take 3 years to get a new ventilator into the market. Design, development, validation, verification, all the usability, human factors, potentially clinical trials to prove that it works before you get regulatory clearance. So Boris Johnson asking to do this in 2 weeks was really pushing the boundaries, not just of the engineering side and the scale of production, but actually to see whether it would actually even be safe. What's the supplier base, and can we help with get components within the supplier base? And again, the medical device industry is relatively small compared to aerospace and automotive, and trying to scale that supplier base quickly was always going to be a challenge. Issues around design, how can we collaborate? And we actually used our clinical expertise. We employ ex-intensive care nurses as our clinical support team, and we actually started helping the design and the usability around the clean sheet designs, not just with what became Ventilator Challenge UK, but also other consortia that were also stepping up to Boris Johnson's call. And just to put things in context, there were 13 consortia that were actually looking at making ventilators at one point. Groups from Cambridge, like Sargentia and Cambridge Consultants, were working on things. Red Bull Racing were working on ideas. Oxford University were collaborating with other manufacturers, etc., etc. And we were helping a lot of those companies find suppliers, issues around usability and design, and also lending them test equipment so they could actually validate their design in order to show the MHRA, the Medical and Healthcare Products Regulatory Authority, prove that these are safe. And the whole size and scale of this was becoming very, very complex and very difficult to manage. But we were very proud to say that we actually did step up, and we did help probably 4 or 5 of the consortia that were eventually stood down. But we helped those 4 or 5 consortia get to a point where the MHRA could evaluate those products. Coming to follow on from Steve's presentation about Ventilator Challenge UK and how we got involved. Well, as I mentioned, we were phoned up and talked to about the 16th of March, and started having the main calls around the 17th of March to help with the clean sheet design. But it was actually very, very evident that this was going to be difficult. And as I've just explained some of the issues earlier, even with industry expertise, to look at the nuances of ventilators, talking about how the lungs work and how the gas actually goes into the lungs, and are you going to need alarms, and what alarms are you going to need? How are we going to troubleshoot these ventilators? All of those things were starting to play on the minds of the group we were involved with, and about whether or not we could actually make a clean sheet design. And at that point, we had discussions about whether or not we should be helping any British manufacturers scale production, or whether or not we should continue with the clean sheet design. And the Ventilator Challenge UK, expertly led by Dick Elsey, moved forward to looking at the issues around scaling production. A company like Penlon, who typically make about 500, 600, 700 anaesthetic machines a year, how can we scale from Penlon to thousands of ventilators in a few weeks? And just as you've heard Steve's story about the Newpack Smith's ventilator, there was the same issues around Penlon. There were component shortages. I mean, Penlon are a small company, turnover around about 10 million. When you have manufacturing, I'm sure all the engineers on the call today would understand. Manufacturing and design for 600 units a year is one thing. Manufacturing design for 40, 50,000 a year would be a completely different design process. So we had there were component shortages, as I've already mentioned. Some of the components were relatively out of date. They could still be sourced if you wanted a few hundred a year, but if you were going to be making 10, 15, 20,000 ventilators, some of those components were going to be out of date. One of the issues of out-of-date components is how do you change them under medical device regulations? How do you actually put those change requests through and actually then prove to your notified body that they're going to be safe? The notified bodies put the CE mark on ventilators. So actually, how can you prove that? So there's a big regulatory issue around this scaling. Trying to get parts in from various parts of the world, I've mentioned freight earlier, became a huge issue. And it was fantastic to see companies like McLaren and using their supply chain, and we've heard from Steve about Rolls-Royce using its supply chain, actually helping get components in from around the world. bringing their weight and size to actually be able to do that was actually quite an incredible feat. Finance was an issue. You've heard that Steve was working probably a little bit at risk without proper formal orders being issued, and actually trying to get the finance through Cabinet Office and available to the consortium to place these orders so that the companies weren't at risk and would get paid for their work, was another big challenge early on in the consortium's work. But one thing that I'd say that my big takeaway from the work the consortium did, and all the smaller companies like us and who actually helped and brought some, actually made this actually work, was around the integrity of the regulatory processes. These are medical devices. They were made, although you can see in the picture there, I think that's an Airbus facility there making components for the sub-assemblies for ventilators. The integrity of the regulatory processes were all very much maintained. So Airbus and GKN, Ford at Dagenham, etc., McLaren Formula One, were all actually audited by BSI to actually become suppliers to ventilator manufacturers. So the regulatory process was not forgotten about, and I think that's fair play to the aerospace and automotive industry to adapt and adopt, but also fair play to the large companies who are running this process to actually understand that we weren't going to run roughshod through regulatory, from a regulatory process. We will maintain that integrity. And Penlon received permission for CE marking their device for COVID-19 during the process. So that shows a little bit about how good the processes were adopted throughout the whole consortium, all the way down through the supply chain. But one thing that I'll just touch on before I finish is the support that nurses and doctors need. I've mentioned it's quite difficult to support a ventilator under normal circumstances. These things are complex beasts, but nurses are under incredible pressure. Usually in intensive care, you have one-to-one nursing. Here, when you look at the Nightingale hospitals, trying to set up a hospital with under extreme conditions, the nurses were going to be under extreme pressure. There wouldn't be one-to-one nurses. There might be 1 to 2, 1 to 3, depending on the number of patients that come through the door. That's going to go up higher and higher. So the same with the doctors, the issues around for the medical staff. These were novel life support equipment. These weren't normally used in intensive care units. The Smith's ventilator is a transport ventilator predominantly, and the Penlon one was a variant of an anaesthetic machine. So these were novel life support machines. How do you get that training? 24, and remember, this runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Patients come in, patients die, patients get better, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Nurses have to have breaks, so then you have different nurses running the shift. They need to be all available, all need to be trained on the ventilator. And then you have what goes wrong. When the alarms go wrong, is it a setup problem? Is it a problem with the machine? Is it an engineering problem? Is it finger trouble? Is it just a sensor? What goes wrong? And how do you support the nurse by the bedside in that condition? We approached Cabinet Office. We've always offered a 24/7 service to our customers. It's one of our differentiating features. And we approached Cabinet Office and said, would you like us to run a 24/7 support for all the ventilators that go in through the government's challenge? Bearing in mind that could actually be 13 different brands of ventilator. And we actually were offered that. We accepted a contract from Cabinet Office to do that 24/7 support. We then had to change our staff shift times. We had to have at least 3 members of staff available at any one time throughout the night and throughout the day. We worked with our telephone company to set up a dedicated number that could have hunt groups so that we could actually track and trace. We had metrics with Cabinet Office as to how quickly we would have to answer the phone, how quickly to see how many calls they were going to get and whether we needed to scale up or step down. And actually, the work with lawyers was an interesting thing. When you sign a contract with Cabinet Office, it's a fairly weighty document with some fairly stringent legal terms in it. So we were working through the night one night with lawyers to actually be able to get this contract done. And I think in all of this, and I'll go into my summary, the pandemic really did stress the system. Big industry, I call it big industry, but you know, the automotive, the aerospace industry really did the heavy lifting with their supply chain, and all the way down to companies like Steve's mentioned, all the collaboration right down at the smaller level. It couldn't have been done by big industry doing the heavy lifting without the SME support. And that's not just from the engineering side, but also from the healthcare side. The stress of the system was put in place. I think the country should be very proud of our engineering resources and the tenacity, and perhaps the pragmatism that companies came together with. Competitors talking to each other, companies have never worked together actually talking to each other. And that collaboration between industries and between large and small companies is a proof of success. The consortium, just for numbers now, if anyone's interested, for Penlon, on the Penlon side, produced 11,683 ventilators. And they did that between the middle of March and the beginning of July. So in about 13 weeks, they produced almost 12,000 ventilators. And that was from a start of 600 ventilators a year. And at one point, they knocked out Penlon knocked out 400 ventilators in a day. Regulatory compliant, safe, tested throughout the whole system. And I think that the country should be proud that of the SMEs that played that pivotal role in helping big industry do the heavy lifting. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Neil. I couldn't agree with you more. It's a very impressive story. Just jumping into two questions straight away, because we've got a question from Nick Brown. Actually, we'll speak a little bit later on. But his question is, going forward, do you see these consortia having a long-term ability to work together outside of crisis circumstances, perhaps?
I don't think necessarily as a consortia. I think there will be companies within the consortia who now know each other and will actually work together. We've already talked to Thales, our neighbours from where I'm sitting in Crawley, about getting together and sharing some ideas. And I've talked to Dick Elsey from the high value manufacturing catapult to see how we can actually get more involved there. And shared conversations with Megit, some senior people at Megit about perhaps going to have a look at what they do and what we do. And I think, yeah, so I think the consortium in its broadest sense won't come together. Hopefully, we never need to come together again. But I think there is that collaboration opportunity because I think everybody has seen there's opportunities to work across industries. And across size companies for a common good.
Excellent, thank you. Another question coming in from John W. Did concerns over intellectual property impede collaboration at all?
Not at the beginning with the clean sheet design. There were questions about who's going to own all of this, and there were some lawyers, IP lawyers, who said that they'll do some pro bono work if there was anything needed on IP. There were lots of discussions with Penlon and with Smiths about who owns the design and who owns the rights to it. And obviously that's their design and their rights. And so there were confidentiality agreements all put in place to make sure that the integrity of the actual device and the actual design were maintained by the legal manufacturers of those devices. So it was very pragmatic approach from everybody to say this is your design, this is your medical device. We'll help rather than we want any IP arguments. So in that aspect there were no conflicts on IP.
Excellent. One of the things that you mentioned, because obviously the situation necessitated a huge sort of shift within your company and sort of really ramp things up. And you mentioned things like, having to develop online tools and all that sort of stuff because your staff couldn't get into the hospitals and things. So in that whole process, and that might be useful to share with the audience, what were the standout things that sort of really helped you progress with that? I mean, just kind of as an example, I mean, in all of our lives, we've kind of all discovered Zoom and Teams and all that sort of stuff, which were kind of tools that were there before, but we didn't really use them. And now obviously we all do. So were there a couple of things that in that whole process that were kind of like relatively easy wins that you could maybe share with the audience that might be useful for them as well?
I think it's the not just the online collaboration tools like you mentioned, but I think for us, we've always used a lot of shoe leather. Nurses and doctors are touchy-feely people. They want to press buttons and twiddle knobs and that sort of thing. And so therefore, typically we would go into a hospital with a ventilator and set it up, and nurses and doctors would come along and we'd show them what buttons to press. Excuse me. So I think the online training was the big standout thing for me, and some of the offers of help and support that came in from companies outside of our sector, and much larger, who have much better resources for that, said that they would actually help to us develop some things, which was absolutely fantastic. And I think that's now opened our eyes to say, if we can do it that way in a hurry, with the resources that these companies can bring, we should perhaps look at that now going forward, and maybe there'll be a change where we can do more online collaborative product demonstrations and training for individual hospitals before we actually get to trying to do this, bring the ventilator into the intensive care unit, so that we don't spend so much time traveling backwards and forwards to hospitals. So I think that's probably the thing that I would take away most from this from our company. Other things that I learned from sitting at on the steering committee of VC UK was just a different way of program management and project management from the guys at Ford and Smiths, who were actually running the programs, and how they report in, and how they reported in with enough detail for the executive team to be able to offer help and support, but without getting into so much detail that the meetings were swamped. So I've learned some project management tools that I think that we've already started to use in our company to say, actually, this is how we want it to be reported upwards.
Excellent, thank you. Just another question, last one, before we have a quick break. From Teresa, actually, how easy was it for the smaller medical SMEs to be involved in the process?
For across the board, I think that once you're on for the supply of to the NHS, I think once you're on NHS supply chain as a ventilator supplier or whatever equipment you're supplying, that becomes easy. They just went straight to their suppliers. I think we had an awful lot of help from an awful lot of companies. I think the Boris Johnson's call made things very difficult for SMEs. I was on the phone for 1 hour and 15 minutes to the Department of Bays, trying to get through. And when I actually told the guy what I actually did, he was absolutely amazed that he had someone who was an expert in ventilation talking to him. I never ever heard back from them. So I would say that there was probably too wide a call, too many people. It was great that everybody wanted to help. Don't get me wrong, but I think it was done with the right intention. If I was to offer my advice, I would say that it should have perhaps been done slightly differently. Go to the medical technology companies first, and see how you scale from there, rather than just having a telephone number for Bays for anybody who wants to help make ventilators. I think that was probably unhelpful in the beginning.
Yes, very interesting, and it's something that was actually echoed by a number of our members as well. Obviously, got in touch and then didn't hear and all that sort of stuff. So very much understand that situation. Praveen has actually come up with a good question in terms of, I mean, obviously with the clean sheet design and needing to turn around it very quickly. What kind of were the main challenges, and sort of what sort of additive technologies and tools did you use to speed up production more so than you normally would, if
Well,
at all.
The clean sheet designs, I mean, basically to get humans are negative pressure breathers and ventilators are positive pressure machines. So it's all about pushing gas into the lungs. And there's various ways you can do that with stepper motors or valves and or even bags in a bottle where you literally just squeeze the bag in the bottle. I think that the biggest challenge around the clean sheet designs, and I know there's still a couple out there that are being looked at in other countries now, is are they actually going to be fully fledged medical devices? And I jokingly said that you would never want to be on an aeroplane manufactured and designed by Inspiration Healthcare. We don't do that. That's not our bag. So why would you want to be on a ventilator manufactured by a non-medical device company? And I think those were some of the challenges that the different consortia saw very early. That unless you actually had those medical device compliance issues and knowledge, you were going to really struggle to get the devices through the MHRA. So the clean sheet designs were probably dropped for all the right reasons in terms of they were started for all the right reasons and dropped for all the right reasons. Starting them because we didn't know where the components were going to come from and can you actually bring components in from around the world was one of the reasons why the Prime Minister wanted British companies to make ventilators. But trying to actually put a ventilator into a hospital with all the complexities around a ventilator, I think was always going to be a big challenge, no matter how good your engineering is. I mean, things like bags, the ones the anaesthetists squeeze, they probably squeeze those 100 times a day in an operating theatre. But adults were breathing at 15 times a minute. So you can start to see whether they would stress harden the bag and actually the work harden the bag, and actually would the bag fail too quickly. So even the simple designs were always going to be challenged around the repeatability of this constant use, because these ventilators were being used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So hopefully that's answered the question.
Excellent, thank you very much. That's great. Right, I suggest. So thank you very much, Neil. Thank you, Teresa. That was good stuff. I suggest that we have a quick 5-minute break, so people can have like a comfort break or make themselves a cup of tea, or check those emails that came in or anything like that. So I suggest that we reconvene at 11:30. I mean, by all means, stay logged in and keep things running. But yeah, now's a good opportunity, I think, to take a brief break. I know I can do with one, where we make ourselves a new cup of tea or have a comfort break or something, and then we get back here at 11:30, if that's okay. So thank you very much. That concludes part 1. We'll be back at 11:30 with part 2. Thank you.